Gospel of Mark and chapter 14. Mark and chapter 14. This is the institution, the start where Jesus, for the first time, shows us what the Lord's Supper is, shortly before his death. And he does it using this key phrase, the blood of the covenant, this phrase that we saw in Exodus. So I'll read for us Mark 14, picking up from verse 12 and reading through to verse 31. Mark 14, verse 12. Now, on the first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover lamb, his disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and prepare, that you may eat the Passover?" Jesus sent out 2 of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the city, and a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him. Wherever he goes in, say to the master of the house, 'The teacher says, where is the guest room, in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' Then he will show you a large upper room, furnished and prepared. There make ready for us." So his disciples went out, came into the city, and found it just as he'd said to them, and they prepared the Passover. In the evening, Jesus came with the 12. Now, as they sat and ate, Jesus said, "Assuredly, I say to you, one of you who eats with me will betray me." And they began to be sorrowful and to say to him one by one, "Is it I?" And another said, "Is it I?" He answered and said to them, "It is one of the 12 who dips with me in the dish. The Son of Man indeed goes just as it was written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he'd never been born." And as they were eating, Jesus took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them and said, "Take, eat. This is my body." And he took the cup. And when he'd given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. And he said to them, "This is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many. Assuredly, I say to you, I will no longer drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." And when they'd sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. And Jesus said to them, "All of you will be made to stumble because of me this night. For it's written, I'll strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I've been raised, I will go before you to Galilee." Peter said to him, "Even if all are made to stumble, yet I will not be." Jesus said to him, "Assuredly, I say to you that today, even this night, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But he spoke more vehemently, "If I have to die with you, I will not deny you." And they all said likewise. I wonder if the children here like playing Spot the Difference. Maybe some of you are too old and wise for Spot the Difference. You know, Spot the Difference, you have 2 pictures, and you have to look from one to the other and see what have they changed, what's the artist changed as he switched over. Well, what I'd like to do with us in our sermon this evening is just very briefly to do a Spot the Difference exercise. You see, we read in our first Bible reading from Exodus, and we had this picture, didn't we, this vivid picture where Moses has these buckets of blood, and he takes fistfuls of it, and he flings it at Israel. And this ceremony, he says, this is the blood of the covenant. This is what's going to bind you and God together. This is the glue, as it were, of this new covenant between you and God. And when Jesus comes here just on the eve of his death, and he's explaining to his disciples what's going on, he decides to use the same picture. He takes them back to Exodus and he says, what's happening here is it's the blood of the covenant. That is what's happening in my death. This is, as it were, the new glue of the bond between you and God. This is the start of this new relationship, this heightened relationship between you and God. I want you to have in your minds, Jesus is saying, this picture from Exodus. But what I want us to see is that there are a few, in fact 3, crucial differences between the 2 pictures. Jesus isn't just copying and pasting into a new setting. He's deliberately changing three of the details of this picture, three of the aspects of this covenant-making ceremony. And those three help us to understand just three ways that the Lord's Supper that we're celebrating tonight, three ways that we can understand it, three privileges that we have today that weren't there back in the old picture, in the old covenant. And this really, blood of the covenant, this is the one crucial phrase of understanding the Lord's Supper. You know, there's so much going on, isn't there, here when we eat the bread and we drink the wine. And it's recorded in three of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and then Paul picks it up in 1 Corinthians. And they all have their different emphases, don't they? They're all trying to show us different things about the Lord's Supper. Some are longer, some are shorter, but all of them, all of the accounts include this phrase, the blood of the covenant. This is the core around which all of the other aspects of the Lord's Supper fall into place. So let's just look together with me at three differences between the old picture, the first blood that bound Israel to God, and the new picture, the new blood of the new covenant. And the three differences will be our 3 points. What, the what changes. How, the how changes. And who, the who changes too. Those are our 3 points. What, how, and who. What? Well, what is the bond of the covenant? There's just a little difference here. This is an advanced spot the difference. It was, back in Exodus 24, you remember, the blood of the covenant. It was oxen that were killed. Moses collected the blood in buckets, and then he carried the buckets to the people, and he took it in fistfuls, and he threw it at them to symbolize that this is now final. You're covered by the sacrificial blood. And as Jesus takes that phrase, he just changes one word in it. I wonder if you notice what that one word is. Mark 14:24. Jesus says to them, "This is my blood of the covenant." Not the blood of the covenant. This isn't a basin that I found lying around and a cow that I've pulled in. This is my blood of the covenant. You may know the work of Macbeth that Shakespeare wrote. You may know that one scene. I'm afraid I know almost nothing about Macbeth, despite doing it in school, apart from this one scene where Macbeth is there with his hands, and he's in agony. He's just killed Duncan, and he's kind of saying, well, is there any way I can wash this blood off my hands? And he's got them there in water, I think, and he's washing and he's washing and he's washing, and he says, if I had a whole ocean of water, there's no way I could wash these hands. In fact, I just turned the ocean red. It wouldn't actually clean me. And sometimes, perhaps on a less dramatic scale, sometimes we can feel that same way, can't we, about sins? We can feel defiled, and we can feel, well, there's no way of getting clean again. We can have this sense of this gnawing sense of guilt that actually there's nothing that's going to clean me up this time. It might be maybe a sin from our youth, years and years ago, and it keeps gnawing away at us, and we think there's no way that's going to go away. I'm hamstrung for life. That taint, that smell, that blood is always going to be. It's going to be there somewhere in my life. It might be a sin of habit, and we feel like we've fallen into it again and again and again, and there's that sense of guilt that no one's going to be able to deal with this. Maybe it's a sin it's had deep consequences on people around us, and we look at the hurt and the damage, and we feel there's no way this can be washed away. Who can take care of this? And we'd actually be right to think that, wouldn't we, if we were there back at Sinai, back in Exodus 24. You look there at that carcass of the ox, and you can feel the blood of the animal dripping down your face and staining your clothes. And maybe you'd be justified in having this doubt. Is that's it? That's all that I get? I've just spent the last 30 years worshipping Egyptian idols. I had to be dragged out of Egypt. I've been here in the wilderness, and I've been moaning and grumbling, and pretty much every opportunity I've had, I've been rebelling against God. And this is supposed to deal with it. There's a dead cow, and there's some blood dripping on me. And then it gets even more confusing, doesn't it? Because just a few days after this, Moses comes down the mountain and he says, well, actually, we're going to have to do some more sacrifices. In fact, every single morning and every single evening, we're going to have to do the same thing again. And you're there thinking, well, it can't have worked. I mean, if we're having to repeat this every 12 hours, it really hasn't worked. It's not going to get rid of my guilt. But Jesus changes that with one word, doesn't he? He sits down and he says to the disciples, this is my blood of the covenant. Mark is a lovely gospel. I think it's underrated, much more complex, much more exciting than people give it credit for. But if you want to boil it down just to one point, Mark is really just asking the question, who is Jesus? Who is Jesus? And he's building up the CV for us. It starts at a sort of rapid pace in chapter 1. And at every point, Mark is trying to show you, look, this man can do what no one else can do. And all the characters in the story, he has them asking questions, and he has them constantly amazed and baffled and overwhelmed as they look at Jesus and say, actually, I never saw anyone do what this man does. Did you ever see anyone forgive sins? Asked Mark. Did you ever see anyone who drove out a legion of demons? Did you ever see anyone who stood up and just spoke with the voice of God and told you everything you needed to know about the world and your Creator? Did you ever see anyone who could just walk on water or calm it with a word? Did you ever see anyone who could just, with one word, raise the dead? Did you ever see anyone, asked Mark at the cross, Mark 15:38, who was the Son of God? And Jesus sits down and he says, it's my blood that's spilled for you. See, just like in my life, I did things that no one else could do. Actually, in my death, I'm going to do things that no one else could do. The power you saw just a little glimpse of in my life, that's the power that my blood is going to have over your sin. And so my blood is enough to get rid of those stains that no one else could. My blood is enough to still those doubts that have been gnawing away at people for 4,000 years or even more, as they looked at those cows and thought there's no way that is going to deal with this heart. My blood is strong enough, says Jesus. That's difference number one, the what. It's my blood. The how. What's different here? Well, do you remember what Moses did with the blood? We had there this bucket that he had, this basin, and he poured half onto the altar, God's presence, and then he took the other half and he walked up to the people, and remember, he took fistfuls of it and he threw it out at them. Well, what does Jesus do? How is his blood conveyed from him to us? Does he sprinkle it? Does he take the cup and he dips his hand and he flings it out at the disciples? Well, verse 23, Jesus takes the cup, he gives thanks. All the disciples in Mark's account, they're already drinking from it. And as they've got the cup to their lips, Jesus says to them, what you're drinking is my blood. I'm not going to sprinkle it on you. You're going to drink it. And you're going to eat my flesh. You know, sometimes things can get so familiar that we forget how outrageous, how striking they are. I had a coat that I bought when I was 18, a waterproof jacket, and it was terrible. I wore it for about 5-6 years, maybe 5 years, and it had a huge tear all the way down the arm where I crashed once on my bike. It was this horrific sort of plasticky blue color. It wasn't waterproof anymore. It was so old. Every time it rained, I got drenched. It was incredibly baggy. It got baggier every time I washed it. The zip had broken, and it was just terrible, but it was my favorite coat. I wore it all the time, every day. Every time I went outside, just a reflex, I slipped it on. It became so familiar, I forgot how outrageous it was. And it took Ina, in fact, one of the first things Ina told me when we got together and she thought she was safe was that I had to put it in the bin. And it did go in the bin eventually. You see, you can become so familiar with something, it becomes so part of your everyday, your reflex, you put it on, that you forget, actually, this is outrageous what Jesus is saying here. Drink my blood. You see, if there's one thing we learn about blood in the Old Testament, Just one lesson that the Old Testament teaches about blood is that you cannot drink it. Don't drink blood. Genesis 9, you can eat meat, but do not eat the blood. Leviticus 3, this is an everlasting statute in your generations. In all of your dwellings, do not eat the blood. Leviticus 7, don't eat the blood in any of your dwellings. Leviticus 17, anyone who eats blood, they will be cut off from my people. Leviticus 19, you shall not eat anything with blood. Deuteronomy 12, be sure that you never eat blood, for it is the life. We haven't even got out of the Pentateuch. Do not eat blood. In fact, this was so drilled into Jewish communities. Maybe you remember John 6. Jesus starts to talk about drinking his blood and eating his flesh. And it's the height of his popularity. In fact, the people just wanted to make him king. And Jesus starts to say, look, you're going to have to eat me and you're going to have to drink my blood. And the disciples are so outraged that they pull him aside in the middle of his teaching and they say to him, look, you realize what you've said is a hard saying. Who's going to understand this? And Jesus goes back and he doubles down and he tells them again, look, you are going to have to eat my flesh. You are going to have to drink my blood. John 6:66, the crowds leave in disgust. They want nothing more to do with a Jew who says you're going to have to drink blood. And it wasn't just the Jews, who struggled with this. One of the big reasons that the Christians were persecuted in the first few centuries was this claim that they were cannibals. It got around that every Sunday they'd come together and they would eat flesh and they'd drink blood. And this is one of the reasons, at least on the surface, that the Romans justified this intense persecution of believers. You see, it's hard language, like the disciples said. This is a hard saying. Who's going to understand this? You can almost imagine, can't you, in Mark's narrative. In fact, some of the commentators pick this up. The disciples there, they're drinking, verse 23. And as they're drinking, Jesus says, you know what you're drinking? You're drinking blood. And you can imagine, can't you, the sort of the hand freezing, about to spit it out, looking at each other, worried. What have we just done? What sort of commemoration, what sort of ceremony is this? So why does Jesus pick something so provocative, so outrageous, so dangerous even for him and for his disciples? Why does he have to use this language? Wouldn't it be so much easier if he picked up the cup, dipped his hands in and sprinkled them? Why this difference between the two pictures? Well, I think to sum it up in one word, and there's a lot that we could say, but to give just a one-word answer, we could say union. Union. You see, remember in our old picture, we had an altar, didn't we? And the altar is there symbolizing God's presence. So Moses goes over and he puts the blood on the altar on this side. And then he takes the other half of the blood and he walks over to this side of the mountain and he sprinkles the people. And he's binding them together, but there's this big distance between them, between God on the one hand and the people on the other. But when Jesus comes and he offers them his blood, he says, drink it, ingest it, let it become part of you. In fact, there's not going to be any distance anymore between me, my blood, between the blood of God and you, the people. See, this covenant ceremony, it's not, as it were, two distinct halves. It's almost, as it were, the merging, one new group that are merged together. And this language, it's all over the New Testament, isn't it? We were, funnily enough, in All Saints this morning, we had Phil Baden preaching for us 1 Corinthians 10 on the Lord's Supper. And this phrase, the cup of blessing that we bless, is participation, a fellowship. It's this oneness with the blood of Christ. Calvin, on this, he draws attention to Ephesians 5, where Paul makes this amazing claim. We're part of Christ's body. We're members of Christ's flesh. We're members of Christ's bones. He's in us, and we're in him. And so when Paul comes, Colossians 1, he comes to give this summary of the gospel. He says, what is it that I'm giving my life for? What is it that I want everyone to know? What's this mystery that's been hidden that is now being revealed and prompts me to go out and die to let the world know? He says, this is the mystery. It's Christ. And then what does he say? Christ next to you, Christ for you, Christ with you, Christ in you. Christ in you, the hope of glory. You see, Jesus is saying that you're not just covered by my blood. That was the first part. It's my blood. But you're actually united to me. You're united to me. We've become one. You and me in you. You're drinking my blood. It couldn't get any closer than that. And so as we saw, as Mark asked this question, who is this? It's not his death that transforms it. It's his life as we're united to him. Brings us to our third difference. What's the third difference between our two pictures? Well, it comes to the who. We've seen the what, the blood, my blood. We've seen the how, sprinkling is replaced by drinking, and we've seen the who. That's what we'll see now. Who is it for? Because this is the question, isn't it? Surely we all want this. We want to have the blood of God shed for us. We want to be united to a man that did things no one else could. So who's it for? Well, this is the third difference. Christ says, Mark 14:24, this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many. For many. For many. You see, I don't know about you, but often I find Lord's Supper makes me become very introspective. I sort of begin to look at myself and think, how was this week? How did things go? Can I really take this now? Is my faith strong enough? Do I understand enough to really benefit from this? Can I really claim on my behalf the blood of Christ and union with Christ? But actually, when Jesus gives it to his disciples, it has nothing to do with them. He hands it out even to Judas, and he says, look, this is for many. This is for many. The context helps us to understand who those many are. I read on deliberately a little bit longer. Maybe you're wondering why. The Lord's Supper finishes, and then Mark packs his punch straight after the first thing that Jesus says as they head out of that room and they go to the Mount of Olives. Jesus turns to his 11 remaining disciples. Judas is already gone. And he says to them, look, every single one of you is going to stumble tonight. Because when the shepherd is struck, you're all just going to be scattered. All of you are going to leave me. You're the closest 11. You're the inner group of the inner group of the inner circle. And every single one of you is going to leave me tonight. And Peter puts up his hand and characteristically says, well, actually, verse 29, they might, but not me. Not me. And Jesus has to break it to him, verse 30. Look, even this night, you are going to deny me 3 times. These are the many. They're the weak, who don't even have enough backbone to stand up with the one man who's given them everything. They're the denying who at a moment's notice are going to turn around and curse Jesus when he's suffering for them. And they're the proud, those who refuse to believe that they could fall, those who think that they're going to be strong to the end, those who think that they don't need help because they've got it all. This is who the blood is for many, says Jesus. And it's not a turn of phrase. He means it. It's for the weak, the denying, the deserting, the proud, and those who don't even think they need it. You see the background here, this language of many, and it's a phrase that comes up a few times in Mark 10:45, and then here again. It comes from Isaiah 53, where we see the suffering servant, and the servant's told that he'll die, he'll pour out his blood for many, he'll bring many. And Isaiah 53 shows us there's only really one qualification to be forgiven, to be saved by the blood of Jesus. And that's that you're a sinner. That's the one group of people that Jesus came for. He came for sinners. And so when Satan comes and he whispers in our ear that, well, it's not for us. This blood, it's a great thing. It's a powerful thing. This union with Christ, it's a great and a powerful truth, but it's not for you. When Satan comes and tells us that, we can reply, well, it is. It's for many. It's for the weak and the deserters. So as we close, maybe just one final reason to give thanks. We've seen these 3 big differences. It's the blood of the Son of God. It's union with Christ. And it's for many, for all people, for sinners. Just the beautiful thing struck me as I was preparing this as we close is that it has nothing to do with us. You can read through this whole Lord's Supper account, and there's only one command in the whole thing in Mark's version, and that's take. Take and eat. That's all the disciples had to do. They were utterly passive. They sat there, and Jesus did it all. He was the one who was going to go and die. He was the one who was going to rise again and unite them to himself by his Spirit. And all they had to do was stretch out a hand and drink and eat. That's the invitation for us tonight by faith, isn't it? So I believe that this blood is powerful enough. I believe that I can be united to Christ. I believe it's for me. That's the message that we have to proclaim. Let me just close us in prayer.